Konrad Curze landed alone on a planet of perpetual darkness called Nostramo, a world drowning in crime, and with no one to teach him anything, the child taught himself one lesson: that fear is the only law that works. He hunted the guilty in the dark. He hung their flayed bodies from the rooftops where everyone could see them. And crime on Nostramo collapsed, not because the people grew good, but because they were terrified. By the time the Emperor came for him, Curze was already what he would always be, a living instrument of terror who could look at a man and see the moment of his death. The Imperium's official story is simple. Curze was a broken Primarch, a madman, a tragic failure who fell to cruelty and had to be put down. But there is a creed in this setting that the Emperor's most devoted followers repeat like scripture. The Emperor does not make mistakes in his designs, so pick one. Either the master of mankind, who engineered 20 demigods with deliberate precision, accidentally built a torturer who saw the future, or he built exactly what he intended, and the lie isn't that Curze was a monster. The lie is that it was an accident. Say his name correctly before we go any further, because the audience that watches this channel will, and they should. Konrad Curze. Curze rhymes with curse, and that is not an accident either. Nostramo, the dark world that made him. The night haunter, the name the people gave the thing that hunted them. 3 names, and by the end of this you are going to understand that all 3 were doing exactly what they were built to do. Start with the world, because the world is the first piece of evidence and the prosecution always opens with the scene. Nostramo was a mining world on the edge of the galaxy, wrapped in pollution so total that the sun never reached the surface. Permanent night. According to Guy Haley's Primarch's novel, the definitive account of this Primarch's life, it was a place ruled not by law but by criminal overlords, where advancement up the social ladder was measured in how much harm a man was willing to do to the people above him. Into that world, a gestation pod fell out of the warp. Inside it was one of the Emperor's 20 sons, scattered across the galaxy by powers that wanted them lost. And of all 20 worlds those pods could have fallen on, this son landed on the one with no light, no law, and no one waiting to raise him. He survived in the underhive feeding on vermin and scraps. No family found him. No mentor took him in. He raised himself in the dark, and the dark taught him the only lesson it had to teach, that the strong do as they please and the weak suffer it. And the only thing that stops the strong is something they are more afraid of than they are hungry. So the child became the thing the strong were afraid of. He moved through the permanent night and found the worst people on the worst world in the galaxy. And he ended them. And then he made certain everyone saw what was left. Bodies displayed from the highest spires of the city. A message written in the only language Nostramo could read. And here is the part that matters, the part the tragedy recaps skate past. It worked. Within a single standard year, 1 year, crime on Nostramo dropped to near zero. Not because the people of that world found virtue, not because they were persuaded or reformed or shown a better way. They simply became more frightened of the night haunter than they were tempted by the prophet of doing harm. Fear did what 10,000 sermons could not. The child had run an experiment on an entire planet and proven a thesis: that terror is not a failure of governance. Terror is a method, and it is the most efficient method there is. Hold on to that because we are going to need it. The man's defining technique, terror as government, was fully formed and field-tested before the Emperor of mankind ever set foot on Nostramo. The question this whole video turns on is a single word. Was that an accident, or was it design? Here is where the canon refuses to give you a comfortable answer, and I'm going to be honest with you about that the whole way through, because you deserve it, and because the alternative is the kind of confident nonsense that gets a channel torn apart in its own comments. So let me lay the creed on the table and then immediately show you where it bends. The creed is this: the Emperor does not make mistakes in his designs. You will not find that line printed as doctrine in a codex. It is not scripture in the literal sense. It is something closer to an article of faith, the natural extension of what the imperial cult actually does teach, which is that the Emperor is the one true God, that his works are perfect, that the master of mankind sees further and plans deeper than any mind that ever lived. The devout hold this the way the devout hold anything, as certainty. And it is the kind of thing the Emperor's most loyal followers repeat like a settled fact, because to them it is one. If you accept that premise, and billions of citizens across 10,000 years of imperial history have built their entire faith on it, then you have a problem. A very specific, very uncomfortable problem. Because the same Imperium that tells you the Emperor's designs are flawless also tells you that one of those designs was a mistake, that Konrad Curze was a broken son, a failure, a demigod who came out wrong. You cannot hold both of those beliefs at the same time without one of them being a lie. Either the designs are not perfect, in which case the whole foundation of the faith cracks, or Curze was not a mistake, in which case the official story about him is a cover for something the Imperium would very much prefer you never thought about. Those are the only two doors. There is no third. Now here is the honesty I promised you. The strongest version of the case against the design reading is not weak, and pretending otherwise would be a lie of its own. So let me make it for you, as well as I can. The lore is genuinely divided here. One reading, call it the nurture reading, says Curze was not built to be a monster at all. It says Nostramo built him. Drop any child onto a world with no light, no law, and no love. Leave him to raise himself among the worst people alive, and you do not need divine engineering to explain what crawls out of that. You just need the world. On this reading, the visions, the cruelty, the despair, all of it is what a death world childhood does to a mind, not what an engineer drew on a blueprint. And there is a piece of canon that cuts even deeper for this side, which we will get to, about what the Emperor actually intended Curze to be. So I am not going to stand here and tell you the design reading is proven. It isn't. It is the most provocative way to read the creed, and the creed is doing a lot of work. Keep that counter in your head. We are going to test the design reading against it, beat by beat, and let it survive on its own evidence or not at all. But the design reading does not start from nothing. It starts from the one fact about the Primarchs that nobody disputes, that they were made on purpose, every one of them, for a function. The Emperor did not produce 20 sons and hope for the best. He extracted his own genetic material, refined it into a pure template, and then deliberately differentiated that template into 20 separate genomes, 20 distinct instruments, each carrying a different combination of his own traits, each built to do a specific job in the reconquest of the galaxy. This is not fan theory. This is the foundational canon of how the Primarchs came to be. And when the lore lists what those instruments were for, it does not flinch. One was made to be the greatest strategist who ever lived. One was the master of psychic power. One was the supreme practitioner of fortification and siege. And, these are the words the canon uses, one was the personification of the terror of war. The personification of the terror of war. Read that again and let it land because it changes everything. The Imperium did not stumble into the idea of terror as a weapon. The Imperium engineered a being to embody it. Terror was not a malfunction in the design. Terror was a slot on the blueprint, and someone was made to fill it. So look at the legions the way an engineer would, because the man who built them was one. Every legion had a job. There were the assault specialists, the ones you threw at a wall to break it. There were the strategists, the administrators, the architects who built the fortresses, and the orators who carried the new faith. An empire conquering an entire galaxy needs all of those. But an empire that size needs one more thing, and it is the thing nobody likes to say out loud. It needs an instrument of fear. It needs the army you send when persuasion has failed and conquest is too slow, and the only thing left that will work is dread. It needs the ones whose reputation does the fighting before the fleet even arrives. That was the 8th Legion. That was the Night Lords. And the records are not subtle about it. During the Great Crusade, the Emperor used the 8th as a tool of terror, that is, the documented function, to pacify worlds that the other legions had taken but could not keep in line. Worlds that had been conquered and were going lax in their compliance. Worlds that were thinking about rebellion. You did not send the diplomats to those worlds. You sent the Night Lords, and very often you did not even have to. Entire systems would surrender at the mere rumor of their approach. Their reputation was a weapon more powerful than any gun in the fleet. The lore gives them a specialist unit found in no other legion, the Terror Squads, and a doctrine of deployment, the pacification battalions, sent to isolated worlds to break their defenses and stand as an example to everyone watching of the price of defiance. And notice how clean that arrangement is from the engineer's side of the table. A galaxy is enormous. The Great Crusade was reconquering hundreds of worlds at a time, faster than any administration could hold them, and the slow problem was never the conquest. It was the keeping. A world taken by force will test its chains the moment the fleet that took it moves on. The expensive solution is a garrison on every planet, a legion tied down forever holding ground it already won. The cheap solution, the elegant one, the one a master engineer would actually choose, is to make the chains hold themselves. You do that with reputation. You make one example so total, so visible, so impossible to misunderstand, that 10 more worlds fall back into line without a shot, because they have heard what happens and they will not be next. That is not the behavior of a legion that lost control of itself. That is the most efficient instrument of compliance an empire could field, and it requires, by design, a Primarch willing to do the one thing the others would not. Curze did not bring that willingness to the 8th Legion as a flaw. He was the reason the 8th Legion existed in the shape it did. So walk the chain of cause once more, because it only points one direction. The Imperium needed compliance at scale. Compliance at scale needed an instrument of fear. An instrument of fear needed a Primarch, who had already mastered fear as a method. And the Primarch who had mastered it, alone, as a child, with no instruction, was waiting on Nostramo, gene-father of the very legion that would carry that method to the stars. At every link, the function precedes the man and the man fits the function exactly. You can read that as the luckiest accident in the galaxy. Or you can read it the way the faithful read everything the Emperor did, on purpose. And here is the phrase that should stop you cold. The 8th Legion served, in the words of the records, as dark judges. They enacted the Emperor's retribution on renegade governors, on cults, on rebels, the ones whose defiance had grown severe enough to call the full wrath of the Imperium down on them. Dark judges and the instrument of the Emperor's retribution. That is not a description of a legion that went wrong. That is a job title. That is a function being performed exactly as specified, sanctioned from the top, used deliberately, again and again, because it worked. So sit with the shape of it. The Emperor built 20 instruments. One slot on the blueprint was terror. The legion that filled that slot was the 8th, and the Primarch the 8th was built around. The Gene Father, whose temperament every one of those Marines inherited, was the child from Nostramo who had already proven, alone, in the dark, before the Emperor ever arrived, that terror is the only law that works. You can call that a coincidence if you want. You can say the Emperor found a terror-shaped sun and simply made use of what fate handed him. But that is a strange thing to say about the being whose entire defining trait, the thing the faithful build their religion on, is that he does not leave things to fate, that he designs. But the audience always asks the obvious question, so let's ask it. Even if the function was real, even if terror was on the blueprint, does that mean Curze himself knew what he was? Does the instrument understand that it is an instrument? This one does. And that is the most chilling piece of the whole case. Because Konrad Curze said it himself. In the lore, this Primarch came to believe, and stated plainly, that each of his brothers had been designed with a purpose, fitted to a function, made for a role in his father's plan. And he believed that his purpose, the thing he had been made for, was to be the monster he had become, not to fall into it, to be it, by design. He looked at his own cruelty, and his own terror, and his own ruined mind, and where the Imperium saw a malfunction, Curze saw a specification met. He did not think he had failed his father. He thought he had succeeded, exactly, at the job his father built him for, and that his father would punish him for it the moment the job stopped being convenient. Now remember what this Primarch was. Of all the gifts the Emperor's engineering handed out, Curze got the one no one would have chosen. He saw the future. Precognition, uncontrollable, relentless, and according to the lore, almost entirely skewed toward darkness. He did not see hope. He did not see redemption. He saw suffering, betrayal, ruin, and his own death over and over, a waking nightmare he could not silence. And put those two facts together because, together, they are unbearable. A being who believed he was built to be a monster, and who could see the future clearly enough to watch the exact moment that the people who built him would turn on him for being one. He could see the hypocrisy coming, built for terror, used for terror, sent to dozens of worlds precisely because he would do the thing no one else would do. And then, when the dirty work was finished and the empire was secure, condemned for terror by the very father who had designed it into him and pointed him at the galaxy. He even said the thing out loud, in the place where it mattered most. When the Imperium finally put him on trial, brought before Sanguinius, who in that fractured moment of the war wore the crown of a second Imperium, Curze admitted everything he had done. He did not deny a single act, but he refused to accept guilt, and his reasoning was a blade. He had been made to act this way, he argued. He was doing the thing he was built to do, functioning as designed. And a tool cannot be guilty of being used for its purpose. If he was a monster, then the monster was the intended product, and the responsibility ran upward to the hand that drew the blueprint. They were not crimes, he said. He was simply what they made him. And there is no clean answer to that in the courtroom, which is exactly why Sanguinius did not give one. He sealed his brother in a stasis coffin and sent him into the dark, telling him only that just as Sanguinius was walking toward his own foreseen end, so Curze must walk toward his. Even his judges in the end spoke the language of fate and design. I told you I would keep the counter alive, and here is where it pushes back hardest. So here it is, square. There is a reading of the canon, and it is a strong one, that says the role the Emperor actually drew for Curze was not monster at all. It was judge, the arbitrator, the ultimate arbiter of justice in the new order, the way another son was made to be the strategist and another the architect. On this reading, Curze was supposed to be terrifying, yes, but lawful, the dread that enforces justice, not the cruelty that replaces it. And what went wrong, this reading says, is that Curze took the shape Nostramo had beaten into him and chose to become a sadist instead of the temperate, terrible judge his father intended. The cruelty, on this account, was his choice, his damage, his world's fingerprints, not the Emperor's blueprint. I want you to feel the full weight of that because it is the honest counter, and it deserves to be felt. If that reading is right, then the design thesis is half wrong. The Emperor built a judge. Nostramo and Curze between them built the monster. The instrument was real, but the monstrosity was a corruption of it, not the intent.
And the creed survives untouched. Because a perfectly designed judge, who is then ruined by a death world, is not a flaw in the design. It is a flaw in the world it landed on. So I am not going to tell you the case is closed. It is not. But watch what that counter does and does not save, because it is more fragile than it looks. Grant it everything. Grant that the Emperor wanted a judge and not a monster. You still have a god engineer who deliberately built a being to embody dread and judgment, and then dropped that being, a child, defenseless, the most important asset in his entire project, onto the single most lawless world available, with no protection, no guidance, and no way home. Either the greatest mind in human history could not foresee what that world would do to that child, which means the designs are not perfect after all. Or he could foresee it and let it happen, because a judge tempered in that particular hell would be harder, colder, and more useful than one raised in comfort. There is no version of this where the Emperor comes out clean. The creed eats him either way. If the designs are perfect, the monster was intended. If the monster was an accident, the designs are not perfect. Pick your door. They both open onto the same room, and that is precisely why the official story has to be what it is. Because the truth, in either form, is unbearable. Think about what the Imperium is actually selling. The whole structure rests on the benevolent God at the top, the master of mankind, the perfect father, the being whose every design is wise and whose every plan is just. Now try to fit a deliberately built instrument of terror into that picture. Try to admit, out loud, in the official record, that the God Emperor engineered a being to embody dread, used him to bring dozens of worlds to heal through fear, kept him on the leash exactly as long as the work needed doing, and then condemned the design the moment it became politically unbearable to be associated with it. You cannot tell that story and keep the benevolent God. The two cannot occupy the same record. So one of them has to go, and it is never going to be the God. So you reframe. You take a designed instrument and you call him a broken son. You take a function performed exactly as built and you call it a failure. You take the most useful answer to the most uncomfortable question in the Imperium. What do you do with the worlds that won't comply? And you bury it under the word madness, because madness is a story everyone can accept. A son who went wrong absolves the father. A tool that was used does not. And the Imperium has done this before. This is the same machinery that erased 2 whole Primarchs from the records, struck their names out, unpersoned them so thoroughly that 10,000 years later their own brothers will not speak of them. The Imperium knows exactly how to make an inconvenient son disappear. With Curze, it could not quite erase him. He was too entangled in the great betrayal, too central to the war, too visible to vanish. So it did the next best thing. It did not erase the man. It erased the design. It left the monster standing in the record and removed only the answer to the one question that mattered. Who built him, and what for? And the swap is durable in a way a deleted name never is. Erase a name and someone eventually notices the gap, a missing statue, a number that doesn't add up, a brother who flinches at a question. Gaps invite the curious. But swap the explanation, and there is no gap to find. The man is right there in the record, fully described, endlessly discussed.
The story feels complete. Nobody goes looking for a missing piece because nothing appears to be missing. You are handed a whole, satisfying narrative. The mad son, the tragic fall, the necessary end. And the very completeness of it is what keeps you from asking the one question it was built to bury. That is a better cover-up than erasure. Erasure hides the body. This hides the motive. That is the cover-up, not a deleted name, a swapped explanation. The instrument is still on display in every account of the heresy. What's missing is the blueprint. And here is the part that turns the whole thing from theory into something closer to a confession, because the instrument signed its own statement. Konrad Curze did not just believe he was built to be a monster. At the very end, he set out to prove it. He had fled to the edge of the galaxy, to a world called Sagwalsa, the Carrion world, and built his final fortress there. And the Emperor, the Father, sent an answer, not an army.
A single assassin of the Calidus Temple, named Mashin, slipped toward the heart of his fortress to finish him. And here is the detail that should make the hair on your arm stand up. The assassin reached his throne room without meeting a single guard. On the world of the Night Lords, the most terror-soaked, defended, paranoid fortress in the galaxy, the path to the Primarch was simply open, empty, as if it had been left that way on purpose. Because it had. Curze saw her coming. Of course he did. He had seen this exact moment all his life, the way he saw every dark thing, the appointed hour fixed in his future like a nail. He could have had her ended the instant her craft crossed into the eastern fringe. He chose not to. And when she reached him, he told her why, and his words are the closing argument of his entire life. "Your presence does not surprise me," he said. "I have known of you ever since your craft entered the eastern fringes. Why did I not have you killed?" "Because your mission and the act you are about to commit proves the truth of all I have ever said or done." And then the line that the whole video has been walking toward. Death is nothing compared to vindication. Understand what he was claiming in that moment, because it is the cruelest and cleverest thing in the setting. Curze's entire philosophy, the one he proved on Nostramo as a child, was that terror is a legitimate instrument of order, that you secure a world by making the wrong choices unthinkable, by being the thing in the dark that the guilty are too afraid to defy. The Imperium condemned him for it, called it cruelty, called it madness. And then, to deal with him, the Imperium reached into the dark, sent a silent thing to a man's home in the night, and removed him precisely so that everyone watching would understand the price of defiance. They used terror to answer terror. They used his own method against him, sanctioned from the highest level of the very state that had declared his method a crime. And he let it happen, opened the door, dismissed the guards, sat and waited, so that the contradiction would be carved into the record forever. He did not let himself be taken because he had given up. He let it happen as a final, deliberate statement. He made his death into evidence. The Imperium built me to be a monster, used me as a monster, and when it needed me gone, it became a monster to do it, and then called me the Broken One. Death is nothing compared to vindication. He was not proving he had lost his mind. He was proving he had been right the whole time, and he spent his life to put it on the record where no reframing could ever fully scrub it out. Which brings us back to the creed and the trap that has been closing this entire time. Run the logic one last time, slowly, because everything depends on it holding. The Imperium tells you, with total conviction, that the Emperor does not make mistakes in his designs. The same Imperium tells you that Konrad Curze was a mistake. Hold both in your hands and one of them turns to ash. If the designs are flawless, then the instrument of terror who saw the future and was used for exactly that and then condemned for exactly that was not an error. He was a product, working as intended, discarded when the warranty became inconvenient. And if instead he really was a mistake, a son who simply came out wrong, then the flawless designer is a fiction, and the foundation under 10,000 years of faith is sand. There is no arrangement of those pieces that lets the comfortable story stand. The broken son explanation does not protect the emperor, it indicts him. It just indicts him quietly. In a register the faithful have been trained not to hear. And I will say it one more time, because honesty is the whole reason this channel works, and the audience here keeps the channel honest. The design reading is a reading. The strongest scholarship in the lore points to a judge, not a monster, as the thing the emperor meant to make, and the death world, not the blueprint, as the thing that turned the judge cruel. That counter is real, and I am not going to bury it to make the ending land harder. But the creed does not care which version you choose. The creed only asks you to pick a door, and both doors open onto a father who built a being to carry dread and judgment, pointed him at a galaxy, ran him until the work was done, and then handed the world a story in which none of that was ever his idea. Whether the cruelty was drawn on the blueprint or merely permitted by it, the monster served a purpose. The purpose was filled, and the man who filled it died, proving the people who used him would never admit what he was for. The Imperium has a comfortable story about Konrad Curze. He was a broken son, a tragic madman, a Primarch who fell to cruelty and had to be put down for the good of all. It is a clean story, and it lets everyone sleep at night. But the same Imperium that tells you Curze was a mistake also tells you, with total conviction, that the Emperor does not make mistakes in his designs. You cannot keep both. Either the greatest engineer in human history accidentally built a torturer who could see the future, or he built precisely the instrument of terror he needed, pointed it at the galaxy, used it until the work was done, and then called the monster a failure so no one would ask who designed it. The Night Haunter saw his own death coming and let it happen. He wasn't proving he was mad, he was proving he was right.